Picture this. Your designer ships a code change that doubles signups without a single engineer touching it. Now imagine your whole team wondering, is no code the end of every front-end developers? Well, today, Samraaj from Ion Design and Agree from Flowglad are chatting with me on whether vibe coding is the secret to traction or a recipe to disaster. So let's dive in. Samraaj, Agree, thank you so much both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
For having me.
All right, let's jump in. So just to get us started, to understand why you guys are uniquely qualified to talk about this, can you both briefly introduce yourselves, your background, and your company? Samraaj, you go first.
Hi, I'm Samraaj. I've worked every end of the product trifecta. I've been a front-end full-stack engineer. I've managed a design team, and I've been a product manager. And now I'm on my second venture-backed startup. I used to work at Intuit, Microsoft, and even started an ice cream company at one point. And now I'm building Ion Design. Ion is an AI visual builder for your design and product teams. It allows you to edit any code base like it's a Figma file. And it's built for organizations, so it understands your design system, your guidelines, your brand guidelines, and your Git pipelines.
Amazing. Welcome to the show. Agree, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, my name's Agree. I am the co-founder of Flowglad. And Flowglad is building payments that anyone can program. So what that means is that, as more people are coming online and participating in shipping software and selling software, there are a lot of cross-cutting sort of full stack concerns that that payments touch on. Things not just around like billing state and the movement of money, but also who gets access to what features and how do we sort of, make sure that the deal that the sales founder or the sales team just constructed, we can actually ship without breaking the product. So why we started this is that our previous startup, Numi, which was a marketplace, or it's actually still running a marketplace that connects startups with designers on subscription, had a whole bunch of these problems just because there are so many different ways that you can package and sell design. And before that, my co-founder and I were building an on-demand grocery delivery service, actually, in East Africa, which in 2019 was the largest platform for on-demand grocery in East Africa by GMV. So that's like sort of this strange detour, that we took. That's us.
Amazing. I want to sort of reiterate that you're both YC founders. Samraaj, if I'm not mistaken, you've been through YC even twice. So yes. Because this is a YC show, I for sure I will have non-YC people, but we're still into the YC thing. And YC has been very big into vibe coding as well. So that's what I want to talk about today. I'm going to try to be the moderator and ask each of you questions, but please feel free to debate amongst yourselves, interrupt yourselves, interrupt me, feel free. So let's get started with you, Samraaj. Let's start with what's the biggest misconception you see about non-technical teams touching code or touching production design?
This is a good question. So I think there's two misconceptions in that, right? What does non-technical actually mean? I think that's going to change over the next couple of years. I mean, certainly there's a pretty big difference between like vibe coding and like production grade coding that is built on years of writing code. But I think that there's going to be areas of the code base that are almost entirely owned by your non-technical team, like a visual stack. I think the misconception is that end to end it's going to be done by the like vibe coders, but I don't think that's the case. And the second thing is I don't know if these teams in the future, like 5 years from now, are going to be directly touching the code. Let's think about like a marketing team, for example, right? I actually imagine that vibe coding makes them way better at being themselves, right? Like a marketing team might be able to define the bounds of like a really good experiment or iteration on a flow. And they have all the bounds of this experiment. And the way I imagine it is it's not going to be the marketing team going into cursor and just typing, please do this, make no mistakes. I see it as an agent that understands the intent of their experiment, overnight goes and implements it, serves it to a bunch of customers, and then in the morning they wake up with data on exactly how it performed and actionable insights, right? Does that mean that they're directly touching the code? Kind of, but really there are workflows and systems to make impact off of like them being themselves. And that's the misconception. I don't think everyone's going to turn into a builder. I think they're going to turn way more into themselves with systems to make themselves better.
Very cool. All right, Agree. What's the one design principle you wish every engineer embraced?
I think that there's an engineering principle of trying to think like 10x ahead of whatever it is the system that you're designing, in terms of like if it has 10x the scale, not just in terms of like, let's say, reads or writes per second, but even 10x the number of use cases that are trying to walk through your code paths, whatever. That's like a very common sort of design principle that engineers, I think, take on. The place where I don't see like the place where I think that there's a very easy leap that you could make from that to improve product quality is actually like thinking in terms of how could you design like your V1. And when I say design, I don't mean just in terms of the code, but like literally what the functionality is going to be or what the requirements are, so that you are not getting ahead of your skis. I think oftentimes that desire to design a V1 that is 10x ahead in terms of the feature set, it's like very easy that it'll naturally creep into, oh, let's like stuff in more features or things like this. Partly because it's just easier to write code than it is to discipline yourself and know this is the only stuff that's needed. So I wish that there was like almost like a counterweight, honestly, that happened more often, where people are thinking, okay, how can I design this so it's ready to extend to 10x the usage or whatever, but not actually like literally build all of that long tail functionality on day one. Super hard, but the world would be a better place if people did it.
This is an interesting take, actually. Like, you're saying that AI making us have more leverage also leverages our like engineer brain, where you overcomplicate the shit out of everything, right? Like an engineer who overthinks every problem and puts every feature now puts 10 times more useless features, huh?
Yeah. Actually, so yeah, I was going to bring this up. This is the take I'm starting to arrive at, is that like AI enabled coding is like this combine tractor moment. I know that like Tom Blomfeld, the founder behind Monzo, sort of has like made this analogy before, which is that like this is like an industrialization of farming moment for engineering. And what's really interesting about that observation is that like you're like, oh yeah, of course, like 50, 100x more productivity per like employee. Like let's do it. That's obvious. What's not obvious is that like imagine you're actually running a pre-combine tractor farm. There's like a whole bunch of like really tacit workflows in terms of like where you get the water from, where is it that you're actually baling the hay, like how do those storage procedures work, and that has like an impact on like the type of personnel that you're going to hire. Literally, an entire stack has been built up around a certain production process. You introduce a combine tractor, it's not like on day one you're just going to be able to retool the entire farm to run it, right? And I was debating this with a very close friend of mine last night, and he pointed something very interesting out, which is at Google. So think about this. At Google, in year 6, they realized that they had been writing all of their code way, way, way too fast. And these were at the time like basically the best engineers on the planet. And they realized they had introduced so many foot guns into their own code base and so much technical debt that they had to spend like a years-long process retooling their own engineering culture to not move as fast. And this is like one of the, I think, very interesting unsolved problems in like vibe coding, is like, as software becomes more disposable, how do you actually make durable software from this like disposable manufacturing process, right? And how do you make stuff that can extend?
Yeah, man. There's the classic line, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. I think that vibe coding is heavily single player at the moment. Mm-hmm. And that allows you to go even faster. But as soon as you introduce some more people into that, you guys are like shooting each other in the foot. You're tied at the ankle and you're just falling over and tumbling, right? So it is really interesting. And to your point about like how long it took like the Industrial Revolution to like change agriculture because of all the processes that were built around the production process, I think even if the current models stopped progressing at this point, we got like 5 years of tooling that got to be built around it, you know?
There's so many, thank you both. There's so many questions that spawn from that. I'll go with the last two that you mentioned. Before I ask the questions, I have a little note here to remind listeners to subscribe, because I always forget. So if you're on a podcast app, please subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, if you like it. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bells. Thank you so very much. So 2 things. One is, how do you mentioned if the models stop now, we have 5 years of tooling, but the models are not stopping. So how do you build tooling? How do you sort of play catch up? Because the models are very likely sort of never going to stop, but still we have to play catch up. How do you think about that?
I mean, the way I think about it is you need to build a company that succeeds and gets even better with the models getting better, right? I think that like the things that aren't going to change is like the interpersonal workflows ever, right? Like the nature of working together on a team and doing great work at the best of your ability of your entire team. That's like a human nature problem. And that's a tooling problem. That's not a problem of like, I'm just going to throw a model at this and all of a sudden I can talk to Agree better. Like that's not really it, right? And I think that at organizations, understanding the intent of a user or the problem that's going to be solved and actually delivering that is a difficult process, right? Every layer of interconnective tissue kind of like degrades the vision a little bit and also delays like the timing to get an insight, right? And the models getting better allows each of those like in different roles to get better, right? Like the role of like gathering the insights is going to get better, and maybe the agentic pass off to actually getting it to like getting built out is going to get better. But there's still going to have to be like sophisticated tooling that like connects the two and gets the product closer to the insight and in a loop, right? And that's the way I think about it, right? Like if you build around filling in those workflows, you're going to do really well regardless of where these models go, as long as you think like future forward on how organizations are going to be structured.
Yeah, I also think that like, and this is to be very clear, like the opinions that I'm sharing are very narrowly contained to the combine tractor moment for building products, right? And the stuff that Samraaj is talking about is like for sure like on that list. I think there's like a set of unsolved problems that are really, really interesting because they don't have to do as much with compensating for models' lack of ability or lack of capability. And they actually have more to do with making sure that the models have the right context and they have kind of like the right scaffolding, right? And I like to think about this problem almost as like the models being like a kind of tool for alignment. And like the deeper problem actually is like, can humans be first self-aligned in terms of being able to articulate with really intense precision and clarity at a very large scale of like depth of detail? What is it that they want to do, right? And can they memorialize that? Like we don't have. This is a very interesting thing in terms of look at how early we are in the software industry, which sounds like an absurd thing to say, but we're at the state now where we check our code into source control, but we don't check our product requirements into source control. We don't like branch on like a PRD, right? Yet how could you expect even a reasoning model to one shot a basic leg of a feature if you weren't able to dump your current extremely high fidelity understanding of what the product like feature that you're trying to build is immediately into its context, right? So this is like some of the stuff that we've been hacking on the Flowglad code base, and the results are right now very promising in terms of like how far that can get you.
Yeah, it's smart as the AI. If it doesn't have the right information, it doesn't work. Okay. And then I want to touch on something that you mentioned several times, or you're sort of hinted on several times, whichever one of you wants to take that. How does vibe coding works multiplayer? Samraaj, you said it's single player today. For big organizations, it will have to become multiplayer. I'm sure you've thought about this at IM Design as well. How does it work? How does it transition?
Yeah, I can take the first swing at this. It's a largely unsolved problem, right? I think that vibe coding is great. A lot of like the tooling that is like really good for it, the bolts, the lovables, and all of these of the world, like they are great for building disposable tools. But at organizations, they are right now stunted to be only used for prototypes, right? For a good reason, right? Like it isn't sophisticated enough or have the right context to build real proper features or changes at that scale. Now, I think that's actually a context issue. And I think that like there's going to start to bridge over pretty soon. And the way I think about that is the organizations are going to actually start to go through changes in order to adopt these tools. And that was one of the moments with Ion where when we started to see people asking us, how do I change our workflows or change how we hire or change how our teams are structured in order to get the most out of your product? That's when it clicked to me that like we're kind of onto something. And there's a bigger wave in AI that's like deeply changing how work gets done. And that's what I'm trying to see, right? Like I'm trying to see how do we set up the engineering team to make the correct like sandboxes, the right environments, the right Lego blocks so that the non-technical folks can get the most out of vibe coding and make real features and production grade things that maybe have to escalate to engineering if it doesn't go all the way, but they get like a huge portion of the work done. And that's how I think things are going to get done in organizations. I think a lot of the actual tooling is going to get commodified, but the people who last are the people who understand, how do we connect this to Git? How do we set up the right environments for designers? How do we get it to understand our data and pull in that context properly? What do like the processes look like to actually test this thing and deploy it? Whose ass is on the line if it goes wrong? If you own those workflows really damn well, I think you win.
Yeah. I think like the multiplayer stuff is interesting because like in my mind at least, like I don't think about it so much. I don't know. Recently, I've been thinking about it a little bit less as like a cross-functional question, but even like multiple engineers, right, who are classically, they would be on the engineering team, highly levered up with AI. You pretty quickly get to a place where there's like more code being written than human review really makes possible. And so I think like, yeah, one of the really interesting spaces that's like starting to arise is like there's a lot of these like sort of like GitHub plugin startups that sort of like you give them like natural language rules or things to check for on every pull request. And, you know, like GrabTile, Merge, and CodeRabbit are like three that kind of immediately come to mind. That
Ellipsis.
Sorry?
Ellipsis is what we use.
Oh, okay.
So,
you use Ellipsis. Yeah. There's like, it's very interesting that it seems like a space that is simultaneously like fairly crowded, but everyone seems to also be doing really well in, probably because there's this, it's a very big problem, right? You have like 3 engineers and all of their output just grew by 10x. How does code review work in that environment?
Yeah. And also on top of that, I think there's a lot of like top-down pressure at organizations, specifically in the last like 2 to 3 quarters, where everyone has like an absurd amount of potential to become like an AI first organization or an organization that is utilizing AI in some way, shape, or form. This is kind of a net change from when I first was doing sales at Ion, where now like these large organizations are like inbounding in and trying to figure out and basically telling me it's like, hey, management has told me I need to figure out how to adopt these tools, right? And I think that is probably raising the tide for everyone in this.
This is a completely different sort of debate, but I'd love your opinion on, do you think companies that end up winning are the ones who adopt AI, the ones that are inbounding to your inbox right now? Or because YC just had their latest request for startup asking for AI first vertical pure players, like AI native players, do you think those are the ones that end up winning overall, or is it going to be case by case?
I think it's highly dependent, right? And I think it's very hard to retrofit an organization to be like truly AI native, right? I think that's a very difficult problem.
So that's a big danger for them, isn't it?
It's a huge danger for them. And also like, dude, they have like X amount of employees. They're not going to like do things that like drastically impact them. And they have structured processes. For example, I was just at Config, which is the big Figma conference. I actually ran a pretty fun growth hack there. I don't know if you saw this, Gabriel, but I walked around Config each day with a gigantic canvas board.
I did see that.
A different word every day, and obviously Ion Design right in the middle. But
cool.
The purpose was to allow the designers and leadership to basically speak their mind to me, right, about the questions. And one of the questions was about like, what prevents you from doing your best work? And another one was about how do you feel about AI in design? And I've never seen such a huge disconnect from the end designer and leadership and how they feel about this tooling. And I think if that still is the way that these organizations are thinking when they start to adopt this tooling, they're never going to be able to evolve into a truly AI first business. And they'll probably get undercut by one of these businesses that are built by these like rebels who are doing everything the new way and eventually just grow out to be like the guys who defeat the empire.
Well, that's some big changes coming our way and billions or trillions of dollars of market cap being disrupted. Interesting. Hopefully. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, hopefully, right?
So we were talking about multiplayer and how organizations, you mentioned Samraaj, how they hire for this new world and they have so many employees, they're not going to sort of fire everyone. So maybe Agree would love to get your take on that. Today, a lot of companies run with the big trio, PM, designer, engineer. And again, you guys are both sort of working actively to destroy that, I guess, in a way. What becomes of that? Who leaves at the company, or what do they do? What's their role? Everyone who has, a team is wondering exactly this. So what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I could start on this one. Agree. I think it's just going to change over time, right? Like the way I put it at Ion is we're building something that we call the visual stack that like sits on top of your code base. And it's not anything really new. I think that each generation of computing created a new stack on like web development or different types of development, right? Like initial days, we were like coding straight like C sharp and stuff like that. Then with web, we got HTML, CSS, and slowly CSS libraries started to build a stack, and then React came as a new stack. And each time there was a new stack made, it brought a huge slew of people who can now contribute when they didn't used to be able to. And I think with a visual stack being created with AI as like the compiling layer, I think there's going to be a huge new slew of people that now actually get closer to product creation. And I think that the way that these organizations are going to change is that it's not going to be as much handoff, but more so creating the right circumstances for you to do your best work, right? I think the engineering work is going to be pushed towards how do you build the best building blocks? How do you build the best Legos to keep everything in check? And I think design and product work allows you to do your own job way better, but now your work has a lot more leverage, right? So maybe the organizations have to hire a lot less of these folks because now each person carries 10 times more leverage than they used to. But do I see like that group of folks or that specific delineation falling apart? Not necessarily.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely going to be some sort of rebalancing that happens. I don't think that people's responsibilities are going to so cleanly fit into those three categories, or it's possible that the three categories remain, but like the cartography of what their boundaries are, where the sites of handoff are, change. But like the sense that I get is that yeah, there's actually this is in that area of unsolved problem, and I like the biggest ones that I see are. One is that there's like not like enough really like rigorous research being done right now in terms of how to develop frameworks. This is like I think actually like a very fundamentally like an engineering problem is like how do you develop frameworks that allow you to get AI code generation on Rails? Because if you can do that, this is like a very, very interesting space, right? But like if you can figure out how to make it so that it's harder for the like AI code generation or AI coding agents, whatever, to write incorrect code, you're like essentially increasing the force multiplier that each of the people who are writing code gets, but also simultaneously increasing alignment, which is really, really, really hard thing to do, right? So you like it's a paradoxical. It blows the brain, right? But like imagine you have something that is like both simultaneously increasing your output, but also increasing the quality of your output, right? So that's like one area that I think a lot of engineering effort is going to go into because it's fundamentally an engineering problem. And then an unsolved area is like not quite what happens to the designer. I think they're always going to be necessary. They're probably their job is going to look a little bit more like probably product thinking, or those are going to be the demands on them. Yeah, and then like really like what do their workflows look like? It seems a little bit like right now that like the current incumbent design tools, including Figma, feel a little bit like last generational almost, in the sense that I'm sure there's a lot of people who are building in Figma, but it feels like right now there's not the mileage that you get from starting your work in Figma or getting really, really high fidelity in Figma doesn't seem to be as much as it was like even 9 months ago.
I'll say that like I work with a lot of younger companies as well, and most of them aren't even picking up Figma, like because they have no need to. And as a second order effect, a lot of them aren't even getting designers. And I think that's going to change, right? Because design thinking is very important at businesses. But I actually think the fact they're not picking up designers is actually a tooling problem because the designer has no way in, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Like, I think about Aleem, who's an old engineer I had. I hired him when he was 16 at my last company, and he went on to start like a wildly successful bootstrap company. They do like millions and millions a year. It's crazy. But I think about his company, and I'm like, man, a designer actually doesn't even have a way in there because if they were to hire a designer, it would actually disrupt a lot of their workflows. You see what I'm saying? But if the workflows actually got baked into AI and product development, I think a designer actually would be able to do really great for their company.
That's very cool. Where do new startups start if it's not Figma? Is it just Cursor and that's it?
Yes, that's essentially right. Like, because I mean, if you start doing like your high fidelity product work within Figma, you're introducing like an entire iteration flow that you didn't have previously,
Yeah.
right? Like, which slows your time from insight to delivery. It's not the best. Some teams do adopt it. I think it is actually like an amazing force multiplier if you're doing like B2B sales, because you could design a lot faster than you could build, and then you could show features off and do demos and things like that. But for actual product iteration, I don't see it nearly as often anymore. Agree. You probably see this more because you ran like a service. So I would love to hear your.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like there was definitely, I think, a lot more happening on the Figma side. But now it's like a little bit like, you know, you're the source of truth is shifting more and more back to the code base, because it like eliminates room for drift. And that's like a huge part of like, honestly, the value proposition behind Flowglad is it eliminates essentially the room for like the drift that can happen between your payment processor and like your application state. And I think that the same thing happens with like product development as well, where everyone knows the meme of like what it looks like in Figma versus like what it looks like on like localhost. And if you can just eliminate that reconciliation problem or that syncing problem, you have a pathway to a much more like a much higher quality product. But I think there's just unsolved problems with that. And this is some of the stuff that like you guys are working on at Ion in terms of like getting it so that like the edits that happen are not the edits that like, let's say the designers or the design voices in the company are making are not, they're not changing a product spec. They're actually changing like the code. And there's like a lot of hard things you have to figure out, including, for example, how to get your non-technical team environment variables. How much do you want to expose to them the implementation details of Git, right? Like these are sort of like the last problems that remain once you sort of say, okay, the AI is going to take care of the code.
Yeah, these are active problems that we're spending a lot of time solving right now. Actually, a lot with Agree. Agree is one of our customers, by the way. Like his company uses Ion pretty extensively. Yeah, that's a huge thing. We actually just dealt with like a environment variables issue with his co-founder, so we're trying to figure out like the best pipelines there. But anyway, like regarding what you're talking about, there's this pretty great essay by Scott Belsky called "Collapsing the Talent Stack." Highly recommend reading it. And his entire thing was like, any company that figures out how to collapse the talent stack, meaning like a designer who could actually implement, or a product manager who could design, or an engineer who knows like product thinking from first principles, right? Those are the companies that tend to succeed over time. And with a lot of this tooling that's starting to come out, I think it's an excuse that every company can now collapse their talent stack almost completely. And does that mean that everyone does every role? No, I actually think that means that you get better and better and better at your own role, but you just have way more leverage on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, very cool. Thank you both for that. Before we move on to our next piece, to our next segment, wanted to hear your take on the latest thing from Aaron Epstein, who's group partner at YC, who's been talking about this pretty extensively. And I'll quote what he said: the design job of the future will be founder. And so he says founder have taste, they have strong customer empathy, and he says it's not a random that two of the biggest YC companies, Airbnb and Stripe, are known for having exceptional designs. So what do you think of this sort of designer role in the future being founder?
I love the concept of it, right? Like, I think it's amazing that now the people who hold the most empathy, that care the most for the customers, that care the most for the experience, and have like unrelenting desire to ship a beautiful, amazing product, now get the access to actually create from scratch, right? And a lot of designers used to be only able to ship things in like design tooling spaces or things like that with like a team of engineers, but now the entire world got open to them. And I think that is fucking amazing. And I'm so excited to see what happens in the next generation of startups. Should the expectation be that every designer becomes a founder? I don't think so. I think it takes a special kind of masochism to go through this journey. But am I excited about the concept that now they have the ability to go do this without listening to anyone, no permission, full agency? Fuck yeah. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I think that it was always there. Like the founder was
Probably, yes.
always
Yeah.
right. One of their jobs was the designer. I mean, like my co-founder Harrison studied industrial design at RISD and then was the founding designer at Imager as his like first gig out of college. And he often talks about how like the designer's job is to essentially be like a full-time thoughtfulness person, essentially. Like that's like what they are at the limit, right? After you get away from sort of like pushing individual pixels and border radiuses and things. And I think that that like always was like the founder's job. It's just like maybe they might have thought the same way. Like there's like sort of the naive founder thought that like, oh, like our problem is that I don't know sales. I got to hire a salesperson to sell this product for me. Right. And it's like one of the most classic sort of first time founder mistakes. I think it's the same thing with design, right? Is that people think that they're supposed to be doing something other than caring about like what they're building or the product, and they're going to hand that off to someone else. And yeah, that like I think what Aaron Epstein said is just very true. That if you look at sort of the track record, and I think all industries or all companies, right? Like if the founders can't like build it or explain why a customer should care, it's unlikely that it's going to work out. And I think that like a lot of what design is you know it's actually like figuring out those fundamentals. How do you make value accessible? And who are you building this for? So yeah, I completely agree. I think it's just always been there.
Very cool. Very, very cool. It probably has. Okay, let's move on to our next segment, the hot take wheel. So I will spin a wheel. There's no wheel, but anyway, I'll say something, and you guys just give me your reaction. So there's three sort of sentences, and you tell me what you guys think. So one, no code tools will eradicate the front end engineer's role by 2027.
That's a good one. I think it's just going to be way different, right? I think that even engineers don't like writing CSS because, like, I don't know, you got to be crazy if you actually like doing that. At least personally, like the CSS itself, I like building really cool, beautiful things, but like figuring out how to position something centrally is fucking annoying, man. Like, so I don't think they want to do that. I think the things that engineers actually want to do is like focus on architecture, business logic, data piping, APIs, stuff like that. So I think it's going to change.
I agree. All front end engineers are going to become full stack engineers because there's just no excuse, right? And all the work, all the problems that are worth solving in the front end that are worth paying like human labor or like human wages for are probably really, really gnarly ones around either like essentially they're all just caching and state management problems. Yeah, stuff like UI, improbable that that's going to be a good use of human time, even like now.
Yeah. I mean, like, what companies now hire like infrastructure engineers or DevOps guys? Like companies at insane scales with specific circumstances, right? Like it used to be the case that way back in the day, this is a problem that every startup had to figure out. Now with like sophisticated tooling, they don't have to anymore, and the job kind of shifted into like more niche fields or like specific circumstances. I think I think something very similar is going to happen with front end.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, the first thing you got to build a server in your house, and then you get AWS and you just point and click, and that's it. Okay, very cool. Let's go with the second one. Maybe Agree, you can start if you want. VCs should require a design audit before investing in seed rounds.
Interesting.
That one also is already happening. You're not going to trust, you're not going to trust your banker if he shows up to the meeting with a ketchup stain on his tie. So,
True.
yeah, you go to someone's website and you're like, damn, this is ugly. Or you like check out their product and you can just kind of tell that they haven't like spent too much time thinking about it. That's a tell, right? It's a signal. It may not be fatal, but a lot of the diligence process is subconscious.
Yeah.
And that's like the resonant frequency that design is oftentimes happening at. It's like pre-rational.
My hot take here that's actually a little bit hot is that most VCs don't actually understand design. So if you tell VCs to do a design audit, they're going to like start talking about your color system and shit, like, which I think is absolutely not necessary. What design thinking really means here is like, how much have you empathized with the problem of the customer and really thought through what they need to experience to solve their problems, right? And that is the type of design thinking that is incredibly important and needs to be in your DNA at an organization to be successful at scale. Because otherwise, you're going to be outcompeted by people who have that design thinking or that passion for the problem space. Now, that doesn't mean that you set up a great design system or you set up a great beautiful, stunning onboarding flow, other than the onboarding flow being really functional. And that's my hot take. I think the VCs won't actually understand what the design system or design thinking really means, and they'll audit the wrong things. But it's also pretty good because there's an arbitrage a lot of VCs have because they have partnerships with design agencies and they just get them matched up and get their design lifted up, right? Which is nice. But that never uplifts your design thinking itself.
I'm listening to you and I'm picturing my own website that is so ugly, and it's been that way for years. And I'm thinking, what must Samraaj think of me as a VC? So by the time this episode airs, which is, a couple weeks from now, hopefully my new website is up, and the new one is so much better because the old one is ugly. It's horrible. I'm so ashamed. You just sort of outed me now in the pod. I know you were thinking of me. Anyway, and I'm kidding. But
I'll say this, right? It converts, right?
Yeah, exactly. It does.
Well, that means that you thought through the design of it, right?
Yeah. But that was my second point is most people, including I think VCs, think of design like colors and shapes. And you just mentioned it's design thinking, it's empathy for the user, and it's make something people want, right? It's the number one thing that YC keeps telling you. So design is not just colors. We'll come back to design thinking in the debate section in a minute, but it's very important. Maybe you should have started with that. What is design? I think now everyone gets it, but that's, not the same definition for everyone. Okay, last hot take with your reaction. Vibe coding kills startup defensibility.
That's a good question. I mean, actually, in that Scott Belsky post, he talks about how tech succeeds because of the user experience of the tech more so than the tech's quality itself, right? And that's always been the case. Vibe coding makes it a lot more accessible. Vibe coding allows you to launch things a lot quicker, but the people who are going to win are going to be the people who build the right interfaces and understand the user's problems and iterate on them long enough and stick around. That's always been the case. So does vibe coding really change it? No, it just makes it faster.
I think that what it does is it shifts where the defensibility is going to have to be built, right? I don't think that Instagram or WhatsApp are under any sort of threat from the fact that we can one shot a 60% approximate clone to either of those products. But I do think that there were a lot of businesses where essentially the reason that they were able to stick around and even command the prices that they did was because they were very early to start accruing software engineers at a time where that was sort of almost a kind of high priesthood that could do a very rare type of essentially writing. Right. And today with that changing, I think that you're seeing a lot of rebalancing. I think that what is definitely going to happen is that the pace is now going to be iterated up really, really quickly. We're starting to see literally the pace at which a startup moves is going fast. And I think there's a lot of honestly uncaptured alpha in just staying at the front of that curve. That you will start looking like you're shipping fast to anyone who cares, your customers, investors, whatever, because all you're doing is you're just staying best in class, right? And I this is another conversation I had with another friend recently. Actually, is that incumbents now actually have a lot more longevity than they did 30 years ago. Because I think that among their executive ranks, there is now a clear understanding that a company, as all companies are technology companies, and all technology is just durable problem solving. So if you're not doing durable problem solving, you will get blockbustered, right? And that's part of why you don't see as many companies getting blockbustered nowadays, is that they are constantly, they have a paranoia loop that they didn't have 30 years ago. So yeah, I think that the opportunities have never been bigger, but I also think that the seat to say the throne or whatever has also never been higher up. You have to sort of do a lot more work to get to that scale.
Yeah. And also, speaking about incumbents, they're also working with so much more data than anyone else. So the defensibility actually gets pretty interesting there because, like, let's imagine the thing that we spoke about beforehand. You have AI agents that are running experiments for you every single night to figure out what converts better. Who reaches statistical significance first? The incumbents do, right? Which means that they're able to run experiments every single night while you're stuck running experiments every week because you just don't have enough data to funnel on the thing. So is that what changes the defensibility? Or I don't know. I think the defensibility just shifts.
I agree with everything you said, and a lot of people think regarding the vibe coding debate, which is what we're having here, which is the UX, the UI is what wins. But you both touched on the fact that there's much more than that. And I was going to say that Samraaj, you summed it up. I agree as well, which is I was going to say sometimes the one that just raised the most money wins because of what you both said. You can just iterate faster, run more tests. Also, as an investor, something that I look at very carefully is, in my opinion, the one that builds the customer acquisition machine that gets him customers while he's sleeping. I'm always asking my founders, how do you get customers while you sleep? And if you're able to build a machine, even if your UX UI is not that great, hopefully you make it better, but then that's how you win. And you mentioned that you can replicate Instagram or WhatsApp code in an hour. 5 years ago or 10 years ago, there used to be those tutorials on YouTube where you could replicate Twitter, and it's not 10 minutes, it's like 6 hours. But anyone who's motivated enough could replicate Twitter in 6 hours on YouTube. And still, it was sort of the slow version of vibe coding or something, but it didn't kill Twitter because Twitter had the network effect and had everything else working for it.
Yeah, you have to sink your teeth into the workflows. That's like one of like the main things that we're trying to figure out here is how do we sink our teeth into like Ion living on your dock, right? On your computer. You have Slack open, you have Ion open at all times, and that's how you go and do your best work, right? Because if you live within that workflow, I think you're not going to go anywhere. And Agree, you also have you guys built a pretty great distribution engine over at Numia. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what Gabriel said.
Yeah. I mean, I think that distribution is really, really important. And I think that one of the theses actually that we have, Numi built some very interesting community-led distribution strategies that like sort of ended up working. A lot of it sort of like around like helping us establish authority in the space. And I've developed a lot of opinions, honestly, on like what founder market fit looks like is like when your customers vote on you. They vote on you as someone who like within the market that they have options in. They say, I believe this person can solve my problem. And it really is about the person in the early days. It's not about, the product, at least when there's like some sort of like, sales led component. But in terms of like finding distribution strategies, like while you sleep, one of the theses that we have behind Flowglad is essentially that like, if you look at the history of payments technology, every single wave where there was a secular platform shift, essentially like a dragon egg would hatch and create this like category defining payments company. And what the phenomenon that was happening was about not the technology, but the technology unlocking distribution, because a new channel was forming that there had not yet been a form factor that payments could slip into, right? So like Square with mobile is like one of the canonical examples. PayPal with the early web, Stripe, honestly, at least in the United States, with like cloud compute and REST APIs. And so a huge part of why we're building what we're building is that like payments in an era of AI is kind of like an unsolved problem because AI is not good at high precision code. The people who are entering and starting to build software do not oftentimes have the intense engineering background necessary to build like production payments code. So it's like, it's actually kind of like an unsolved space in its entirety. And so, yeah, I think that like, this is also why like a lot of people are building in AI is like literally there is just action happening in that area. And there's like people who are ready to change customer behavior in ways that very rarely happen. Right. And so businesses that weren't even viable had no shot, like even 3 years ago, they're on the table now. It's possible.
Yeah, that's very cool. Let's hope you're right and this wave carries you as high as PayPal or Square. Okay, let's before we leave, because I gotta let you guys go. Sadly, I could stay here for 3 more hours, but we've got all of us have busy lives. Let's move to our future bets. So first one, any of you or whoever thinks wants to get that in or both in 5 years, what's the number one AI driven design workflow every startup will swear by?
This is a really good question. I need to think about that for a second. But I think the workflow that every company is going to swear by is like agentic flows, where it understands exactly what your users are doing. It surfaces the insights to you as like an end designer or an end customer, and those propagate into real product changes over and over again. How that actually is implemented is a huge question to me, and how like the workflows are done is a huge question to me, and hopefully Ion is a huge part of that.
I was gonna
But I
say.
think it's yeah, but I think it's almost non-debatable that the end product delivery is not only going to be owned by engineers. And I also think it's non-debatable that you're going to have a ton more data about what is wrong, what is working, and what can be changed. And where those actually get connected is still kind of a question.
Yeah, I think that I agree with a lot of what Samraaj said. I think that the next 5 years are going to be a very large retooling of not just how software is built, but like where software state is stored. And the reason that that is, it's like not obvious why that would be so important to figuring out this design workflow. But a lot of what obstructs agentic self improvement loops that you would be able to compose inside of a product have to do with the fact that there is context and there is oftentimes like live production state that you risk breaking if you put sort of too much in the path of the AI to have to like manage, right? Ideally, for example, you would want your AI to be entrusted with nothing more than a nail clipper rather than neurosurgery tools, right? And so as we can get more of the software building process into like nail clipper territory, it becomes a lot easier, for example, to have like a loop that runs. It's like literally, okay, get me the screen replays or the session replays from my analytics tool. We now know this roadmap that we have slotted. Feed the session replays into reprioritizing or re-ranking this roadmap. If you have any specific quick fixes that you can issue, like surface those as like literally like press like a like button in Slack and like we'll get a pull request out to you immediately. Like that's coming, right? And I think that that's like what a lot of the design of the future is going to look like. But in order to do that, there's a lot of like stuff you have to get out of the AI's way.
Yeah, actually, that's a pretty interesting bet. Essentially, the way that I would compress this is that 5 years from now, companies will be built around the AI workflows rather than the other way around. Like the businesses that are built in the new age will see what is possible with the AI and structure their code bases to be built around optimizing those engines rather than trying to retrofit engines on top of their like Next.js app or whatever it is and trying to generate on top of it. Instead, they're going to be like, how do I silo everything so that like I give the ability for somebody else to just go all the way with this?
Yeah.
Very cool.
You
wanted to add something? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, we're literally starting to see this with you guys. Agree? Like you've spent some time to like get Ion even better set up so Harrison can do more and more work.
Yeah. This is a thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about. Is like literally we gotten to the place where like so I'm sort of the more like I'm the engineer and my co-founder Harrison is the designer, and we're now getting to a place where we are like committing natural language prompts or base prompts as we call them into our source code, so that Harrison can do things like instead of having to remember like all the various Git and environment variable and package installation incantations, he can literally just tag a natural language text file that gives instructions to the agent to just get everything set up. Yeah. So it's like 5 years of doing that. Where are we going to be as the models improve, in the background?
Huh.
Yeah. There's been also a couple of PRs in the last month that have exposed more work to Harrison available within Ion too, if I'm not mistaken. Like you try to get him as much out of the product as possible and you like kind of like reform your entire structures around it, which I think is cool. And I think that's going to be more and more common.
Yeah. And this is something actually that Samraaj and Samuel and I have been working like and talking a lot about is like, how can we get it so that you can get like almost like the designer to a place where they can like have almost like a wet cell, a wet slide, like a biologist, where they can look into a microscope and be like, here's the component, here's how I know it needs to change its behavior. And that is a lot of very interesting stuff that essentially boils down to abstracting away localhost 3000, abstracting away even the need for like thinking about like a page component in your web app. You got to figure out how to render like an isolated React component and then make it easy to prompt. And I think you guys have done a lot of interesting stuff in terms of breaking down like what the prop shape is supposed to look like, or the styling and stuff. And yeah, the second half of the bridge is just like, once we can get those components in isolation, I mean, it's like a liftoff event in terms of like UI is now a fully solved problem. It's like a natural language problem.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's like the thing I was working on all of last week is like, what is the minimal amount of AI generation that I can do in order to allow you to isolate every component and get like a full Figma-like experience, where it's just like constantly doing like compiler-based code generation instead of only AI-based, because we have compiler backgrounds. That's way faster, way more secure, way more deterministic. And that was a huge problem that I was working on last week that I kind of just unlocked, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and this is, sorry, to also triple 3x what he just said, is it something that Samraaj has been talking about that I've sort of started stealing, because I think it like describes something that I knew to be true, but I didn't quite have the exact words for, is the judicious use of AI. And this is like again, one of these underappreciated and like not yet fully understood things is AI is insanely powerful if you can like very, very tightly constrain it. So ideally, it's not the sun, it's actually a laser. That if you can figure out how to get it to point at like one thing and get you, let's say, like a single JSON payload, you can then, it's now worth it to build an insane amount of software, an insane amount of tooling that will transform this tiny JSON payload into like full-fledged functionality. And I think that's like a lot of the work that is like waiting to be done, is like, how do you build all those abstractions so that you can get the most out of like a tiny amount of like token allocation or token output from AI?
Totally. And agree, I gotta say, your analogies are almost second to none, man. Like the wet cell, the laser, everything.
Yeah, I guess it's how I think. I don't know.
I agree. You should write a book or at least a blog post or something.
He's like in the essay writing community.
Okay, so
Yeah.
let's, this is where we'll land. What if, where can listeners find you, find more about yourselves, your essays, Agree, and what you're building?
Yeah, so you can follow me at Agree Ahmed on X. You can check out my Substack, where I write about historical systems of like finance. I most recently did like a sort of 6-part essay series on the operational details of the Soviet Union's transition to a market economy and a payments workflow. Yeah. That's my like sort of nights and weekends hobby when I'm not building a
awesome.
yeah. And also I had like an essay recently published in Works in Progress about the Hanseatic League, a medieval German merchant community, and their impact on like economic development in Europe.
No way.
So, yeah. So I like that's my nights and weekend stuff. And then obviously you can check out Flowglad if you want payments that you can program regardless of your technical skill level.
Sweet. You can find me on LinkedIn, Samraaj Bath, Bath, and on X at Samraaj, Samraaj. And you should check out ion.design, ion.design. Will make you move 10 times faster on design, on front end, and allow you to learn faster and just be an organization of the future.
Amazing. Thank you both for coming. That was too short, but I had an amazing time. Thank you both for your insights. To our listeners, thank you for listening until the end. Again, leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe if you're on YouTube, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks so much for having us. Bye.